Hi guys, so my good friend Lord Frost, the former Brexit Minister, has been at it again, trying to find Brexit benefits while he's been out of a job. Yes, he still can claim his £300 or so a day in expenses as a member of the House of Lords, but like Nigel Farage, the grift never ends. So he wrote this article for the pro-Tory, pro-Brexit Telegraph, which I want to pick apart somewhat. So I'll not dissect the entire rant, but try to highlight some of the more insane parts. Now, near the beginning he says, and I quote, "The grand new free trade agreement we have been told would take 10 years to agree was put in place in 10 months, and the behaviour of the EU in 2021, from subverting the Northern Ireland Protocol to rubbishing the AstraZeneca vaccine, left few people interested in refighting all battles." Now, when it comes to trade deals, and I've said this before myself, good trade deals take time and they take effort. Bad ones can be over in a weekend. All it takes is for one side, the desperate side, to cave in first. Which side caved in when it came to the UK-Australia trade deal? Well, if you want to answer that question, just look at which countries' farmers are happy and which aren't. Also, like many Brexiteers, David Frost can't tell the difference between the European Union and EU member states. When he says rubbishing the AstraZeneca vaccine, he is of course talking about France and Macron, the president in particular. Sorry David, France isn't the EU. Someone needs to burst that bubble. Now, while not presenting any Brexit benefits, he attacks those who suggest that Brexit is actually causing problems. He then goes on to talk about any possibility of undoing Brexit. He says, and I quote, "Of course there is little chance of a serious rejoin campaign developing in the short term. Remainer Jacobitism in support of Ursula von der Leyen as the Queen over the water is just too unpopular." What is he talking about here? Ursula von der Leyen's popularity hasn't even been polled in Britain. Once again, a case of more important people living rent-free in his head. He goes on to say, "The leaders of the pro-EU cause recognise that themselves. Instead, their aim is to keep us aligned with the EU, often using the Northern Ireland Protocol as a weapon. They know that if the UK doesn't diverge much from EU law, it will be much easier to take us back in later if events work in their favour." Now, I'm beyond angry with idiotic Brexiteers like Frost, who don't even bother, it seems, to read his own agreement, using language like the Northern Ireland Protocol as a weapon in the context of Northern Ireland. He clearly doesn't care what sinister elements he's egging on here. Look, the EU has pretty much moved on from Brexit. It's hardly spoken of in the corridors of Brussels. But in Lord Frost's paranoid mind, Ursula von der Leyen is still plotting away in smoke-filled backrooms with members of the UK Parliament to find ways to bring Britain back into the EU. Just one other thing. Take us back in. You mean like a referendum? You mean an expression of democracy that you Brexiteers care so much about? I understand he was an unelected bureaucrat, so perhaps this understanding of democracy is maybe above his pay grade. He then attempts to dismiss real problems as footnotes. He says, "They use any argument that comes to hand. Last autumn it was the HGV drivers and the threat to the Christmas turkey supply chain. This month the story is the latest trade figures and the delays at Dover, the latter caused in fact by the withdrawal of P&O ships. A chart has been circulating showing that our trade performance has been stagnating since Brexit. The HGV driver shortage is long term. It hasn't been fixed yet, David. The turkey supply problem was mostly fixed by either flying in workers, you know, the ones that you Brexiteers like David as well voted to keep out. Well, they were flown into farms, or supermarkets purchasing turkeys from countries like Germany in the EU. Sorry, David, but how is this a benefit for British farming again? I don't even know what sort of argument he's trying to make when it comes to P&O ferries. Most people, including myself, have not blamed the problems of P&O squarely on Brexit. Brexit has its part to play, but it's more to do with the stripping away of workers' rights and the foot-dragging of the Tories. Side note, fewer protections for workers is something I believe David is very supportive of. Finally, I want to touch on the denial of reality and the rewriting of history. Now, he quoted the figure from the Office for Budget Responsibility, which forecasts that Brexit will cause a 4% drop in GDP. He says, "This of course not a fact, but a prediction, though the distinction seems lost on many. This is a straw man. Nobody said that the OBR figure was a fact. Does the guy understand how the OBR works? Well, clearly not. It's the same body that provides data to the Chancellor in order to produce his budget. It is good, but it's not perfect. What does David have to counter that? Please may not be belief." He says, "Moreover, it's a prediction based on an assumption that higher trade causes higher productivity. But the association is just as plausible the other way around. The link between trade and productivity growth found in many analyses of Brexit is often based on evidence from emerging markets or ex-communist economies, where increased trade went with huge improvements in the way countries were run more broadly. It doesn't hold up anything like so clearly for advanced economies. Indeed, the UK's own trade openness has grown since the financial crash, but productivity has not." Notice he didn't point to any figures here. Just if we do trade deals in the future with advanced economies, we will raise GDP. Well, considering how the current trade deals have gone and the fact, sorry David, it's a fact, that the US is not in a hurry to sign a trade deal with the UK, your belief in things getting better is as plausible as my belief that you aren't afraid to do an interview with me and answer my questions about Brexit. Sorry, I got a bit sidetracked there. Finally, he says, "Of course, no sensible person would deny that leaving the single market and the customs union has some effect on trade in the short term. I have always been clear about this. The Chancellor Rishi Sunak repeated it this week." And here we have the rewriting of history. Brexiteers in the run-up to the referendum were talking about how wonderful trade deals would be done the day after the vote, that the economy would see a massive boost within weeks and months and even years of leaving. Well, the opposite is factually true. The trade deals have been crap and the economy has suffered. But David Frost wants you to believe. This is the man who negotiated the withdrawal agreement on behalf of Boris Johnson. It was so wonderful that he was put in the House of Lords and made Brexit Minister. He then negotiated the TCA, which was forced through Parliament by the Tories so quickly that MPs weren't allowed to scrutinise it. Then a year and a half after the withdrawal agreement was signed, David was trashing it, saying it was signed under duress and it was all Theresa May's fault. We'll be waiting a while for Frost and Johnson to take responsibility for the mess that they have created, but remember one positive reality and one negative one. Johnson can be removed from office, Frost can't. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.